Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. I have with me again Pam Lindemann from the IEP Advocate for the ABCs of IEPs Session 2. I hope you guys enjoyed the last session. If you missed it, you can check out our YouTube page or our Facebook page. And both the last session is available there now, and this session will be there when we're done tonight. Just a little bit about Pam, if I find my notes. She is founder and president of the IEP Advocate. Through personal experience, Pam started the IEP Advocate 12 years ago. Today, your organization is the largest private education advocacy organization in the state of Florida. Pam has personally participated in over 2,500 IEP meetings, consulted with over 4,000 families, and taught advocacy strategies to thousands more. Pam's passion is teaching families how much power they have in the IEP process. Thank you very much, Pam, for coming again today, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me just turn your presentation on, and I'm going to turn myself off. And if you have any questions from the audience during the presentation, just put them into the chat, and we'll get to them when the presentation is over. Thanks a lot. Sorry, Pam, you're muted.
There you go. I apologize. Is that better?
No problem. Just put your presentation back on.
I'm putting my presentation back on. There we go. All righty. So we're going to be, I'm going to be speaking, and then later on we'll take questions, and you can type your questions in, and Jason will clear those out for you. So at the end of this presentation, if you have anything you want to ask me, feel free to do so. This is me. This is our organization, the IEP Advocates. We are a group of advocates who work with families to help families get services from the public school district. So everything I talk about today has to do with the public school district, because a private school doesn't, technically they don't have an IEP. Let's talk about COVID, because this is a timely topic, and it's really important for a lot of families to really understand how COVID has impacted your child's education, as far as getting services, what the public school district is obligated to do, what they're not obligated to do, what your rights are, and everything along those lines. So a lot of families, you may know or be better acquainted with what your rights are and what you can or can't do in a regular school year situation, but this is anything but a regular school year situation. So I thought it would be very beneficial to go over some of the principles of dealing with the school system when your child has an IEP during COVID. It's critically important to remember that the federal law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has not changed. The same rules, the same guidelines, the same principles still apply to school districts, okay, as they did on March 13th when this whole thing started to happen, okay? So school districts have the same legal obligations they had before COVID-19 happened. Nothing changed. They still have to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education. They still have to do evaluations. They still have to collect data. They have to provide the services that are on the IEP. They have to write an appropriate IEP that affords a child a free, appropriate public education. They are obligated to do evaluations. If there's a service on the IEP, even if your child's doing home, distance learning or online learning, this district is still obligated to provide those services. So the United States Department of Education states it's important to emphasize that federal disability law allows for flexibility in determining how to meet the individual needs of students with disabilities. It allows for the determination of how FAPE, which means how a free, appropriate public education, is to be provided consistent with the need to protect the health and safety of students with disabilities and those individuals providing special education and related services to students. What that basically all means is that the United States Department of Education in March, when the COVID thing really, was having its impact educationally, the federal government said the law is staying the same, okay, and we're not going to, require that the law change, but we also recognize that this is a crisis, and we recognize that some things we're going to have to give a little bit and be a little bit flexible. Probably the best example I can give is is therapy. So therapy most of the time is one-on-one or small group therapy, 30 minutes twice a week, and the child is with the therapist either in a therapy room or in the classroom. Well, that's not possible during COVID. So one of the flexible options that districts can use is they can use teletherapy. And it may be effective for some kids, it may not be effective for other kids, but it is an option that districts can use. What I would encourage you is to keep track to see if your child is benefiting from the teletherapy or whatever the service is that the district's delivering virtually, because the child still has to benefit. They still have to make progress. And if they're not making that progress through teletherapy or through the services that the district's providing online, then that needs to be noted and that needs to be discussed, because there may be a different way that everybody needs to look at providing those services. It's important to keep in mind that most of what you're hearing on the news is about students in general education. So there's no discussion about children who have IEPs. I've never heard that on the news. I'd like to, but I don't. Children who do not have an IEP do not have the same rights as children who do have an IEP. Let me give you an example. If you have a child without an IEP, they're just a gen ed student, the school, all of those parents who have kids who are gen ed students without an IEP, when the district says to you, you have to decide what kind of learning environment option you want to choose for your child. You can choose distance learning, online learning, or you can do face-to-face brick and mortar. So when the district says to you, says to the families, you have to make your choice for this semester, and then in January, you can change your decision and do something different, but you have to stick with that for the rest of the school year. That instruction is for families of kids without IEPs, and they have to follow that instruction. They have to follow that rule. However, when your child has an IEP, the district cannot dictate that. That's because the IEP has precedence over what's convenient for the school district, all right, or what the school district wants to implement. If your child, so let's say at the beginning of the school year, you chose online learning and you wanted to keep your child home, you didn't want him to go to school, and you told the district, I want online distance learning, whatever your district calls it. And so you said, that's what I'm going to use for my student. And the school says, okay, fine. Well, let's say in a month and a half, 2 months later, you're at home with your child and you're about to just jump off the nearest bridge, and he is too, because it's just not working. He won't focus, he won't listen to you. You're trying to be a teacher. You were never meant to be a teacher. You were meant to be a mother, but not a teacher or a father, and it's just not working. And your child's not benefiting, and the struggle is just too great. Well, you absolutely have the right to ask the school to have an IEP meeting, to have a discussion in an IEP meeting format, to have a discussion with the team about your child's education, what's happening, what's going well, what's not, and to discuss the idea of moving that child back to a brick and mortar setting, into a regular school setting, even though it's the middle of the first semester, okay? Because when a child has an IEP, it's your child's placement, your child's educational program depends on what's written on that IEP. So if you started the school year out with an option and you thought it was the best and it's not working out and you need to change, contact your district, get an IEP meeting, and make the switch through an IEP meeting with the staff. Okay, so it's important to remember that these things that you're hearing a lot in the news don't deal with kids with IEPs. They deal with gen ed kids. Here's a shocker. I love this picture. School staff members, including principals, teachers, and staffing specialists, don't always know what they're talking about. All right. And here's another thing. School staff members, including principals, teachers, and staffing specialists, sometimes lie. That is a shocker, right? But it happens. And it happens frequently, more often than it should. And when COVID happened, no one knew anything. It was, you remember, we didn't know anything. The school districts didn't know what they were doing. Teachers didn't know what they were doing. There was no instruction to teachers from their supervisors. School district personnel were changing everything from day to day. One day you'd hear they're going to open up. They didn't open up. They opened up 2 days later. It was a royal mess. Things have settled down a little bit since then. It's now the beginning of a new school year. There is a little bit more calm. There are calmer waters out there. However, most people still don't know what's going on. You know, as a parent of a child with an IEP, and my daughter's now 25, when she first got that IEP 24 years ago, I thought the school district staff would be trained on what the rules were and what the guidelines were. And over the years, I learned that they are very, very poorly trained. In fact, I had one mother who called me and asked me if I would work with her and work with her and her child and work on his IEP. And I said, sure. And I said to her, you sound very familiar to me. Your name is very familiar. And she says, oh, yeah. She said, I'm a staffing specialist for the XYZ school district, and you've been in several meetings. And I immediately knew who she was when she told me her name and where she was from. And I said, yeah, I remember. She said, every time you come to a meeting, I learn something new. Every time you come in, she said, I learned something more about my job. I learned something more about a parent's rights. I learned something that the school never taught me. And she said to me, you know, I sit there and in these meetings and I listen to you and I'm wondering, how come the district has never taught me this? How come the district has never told me all of this? Because it's really helpful and important information. Well, it turns out she's the mother of a child who has an IEP. So when it came time to advocate for her own child and have an IEP meeting, she called me up and asked me to work and be her advocate because she said, you know, even though I work for the school district, she says, they're not taking care of my son. And I need to go in there and be able to really, make sure that they're doing the right thing for him. So, and then she said to me, which I thought was really profound. She said, there are basically two types of parents in the school system. Parents who bring an attorney or an advocate to their IEP meetings, and those parents get services. The parents who don't bring anyone with them to their meeting don't get anything. And I thought that I would agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. I know the difference that an advocate makes in coming to a meeting, and not just because I am one, because I know what we've been able to achieve that parents on their own haven't been able to. So the importance of knowing that that the staff is not as trained as you think they might be is because they don't tell you the truth. They don't know the truth. And so a lot of times they heard something from a coworker or they got an email, but they don't really understand the whole email, and therefore they might misrepresent the statement. They were told something who was told by somebody, and by the time, it gets to this person in the game of telephone at the end, they've completely messed up the message. So you can't always believe what they tell you. For example, one of the things that parents are being told if their child is at home doing distance learning is that the school's not obligated to follow the IEP. They're not obligated to follow the IEP if the child's doing distance learning. And here's the thing. I had a district program specialist. That's someone, whose office is in the main building of the school district, and she's an administrative person. And she told a parent that the IEP could not be provided because the mother's child was doing online learning. That's a flat out lie. That's just a flat out lie. I called her up on it and left her a message. She never returned my call, but that's just a lie. If your child has an IEP, the district is obligated to provide those services that are on the IEP. If they have to be, the presentation of which has to be tweaked or something like that, that's fine. We can agree to that, but it is not acceptable for things just not to be provided. So please know that when you're looking to answers from the school personnel, you may not always be getting the truth. However, I may say, if you contact me in my office, you will always get the truth because we have no reason to lie to you. I have absolutely no reason to tell you anything but the truth. So I always tell parents who we work with, I said, please call me. Don't call your mother. Don't call your friend. Don't take advice from the mother sitting next to you in the therapy office. I'm sure they're all lovely people. But there are so many interpretations of what an IEP is, how an IEP, the rules regarding an IEP, regarding special education law. I'm not an attorney, but there are so many stories out there and misunderstandings that you can easily get confused. And so I always tell my families, just don't talk to anybody else but me. If you have a question about IEPs, call me, I'll give you the true scoop. All right, so add this statement to the meeting notes. If your IEP team in a meeting is creating a short-term change to the IEP to provide services during the pandemic, which we're still in, but you want the rest of the IEP to stay the same, the representatives at the Florida Department of Education agreed it would be appropriate for the following statement to be added to the meeting notes. This is really important. The pandemic is a temporary situation. At some point, it will go away. All of the IEPs that were written prior to March 13th were written for a brick and mortar setting, for a face-to-face school environment. They were not written for distance learning. At some point, we're going to go back, whenever that point is, we're going to go back to brick and mortar and face-to-face. We do not want to gut the IEP and completely change it just because our child during this temporary shift is at home doing distance learning. And then when I say distance learning, I'm meaning online learning, distance learning. The districts all have some type of their own online program, okay? We don't want the IEP to be gutted just because of this temporary situation. We want the IEP to stay the way it is. So when you have a meeting, you don't want to remove services. For example, I had one family who I talked with, and she said that the school was telling her they had to take off all the services that were on her child's IEP because he was no longer learning in the school. He was doing his learning at home. And so therefore, they couldn't provide the same services as were on the IEP. So they wanted to take everything off that IEP and write services on the IEP for distance learning. And that looked completely different with a lot less services, I may say. That looked completely different than the IEP that was in place before. You don't want that to happen. So this is what I'm talking about here, is in the meeting notes, and this is from the Florida Department of Education. I talked to them on March 16th, 2020, right after this COVID thing happened, and this is what they agreed would be appropriate to write. Due to the temporary situation caused by the pandemic, the IEP team agrees to add temporary services to the IEP, but once the pandemic crisis passes and school is back in session, the previous services on the IEP will resume as written. And that's what you want them to add to the IEP, or to have them add in the IEP notes, okay? That way, everybody agrees and acknowledges that there are services that are being provided during this unique time, but we're all going back to the IEP the way it was. So once all of this falls back to normal, whenever that may be, because here's the thing. Let's say you have a child who has OT and maybe occupational therapy, and they have small group for reading and math, and they have some counseling services and on their IEP. And then they go to distance learning, and your school may tell you, well, we can't provide all of that. We can't send a counselor to your house. And a lot of times, schools were saying, we're going to have to take those services off. You don't want to take those services off, because you'll never get them back again. Because what will happen is, this is exactly what will happen. They'll be taken off of your child's IEP. Let's say next school year, everything's calmed down. We've got vaccines all over the place, and everybody's healthy. And next school year is going to be more of a traditional school year. And you go into your IEP meeting at the beginning of the year, and you're saying, okay, we're back to face-to-face now. My son's not going to do face-to-face, is not going to do online learning anymore. So we need to put the IEP back to the way it was. And I can just about guarantee you what you're going to hear is, well, what we'd like to do, because we want to make sure, it's been a whole year since he's actually been in the face-to-face environment. And we want to make sure that the services are appropriate for him and that we're giving him the right help that he needs. So what we're going to do is collect some data. And we're going to collect data on how he performs, how he does in academics, how he performs socially, and that counseling. We're not sure if he still needs the counseling help. So we're going to observe him and see if he exhibits any signs of needing counseling. They're going to give you what I call the great big stall. They want to stall. They don't want to put the services back on the IEP, and you're going to have to go through the whole process again of them collecting data, then you having a meeting, and then they're going to tell you they didn't collect enough data, and then you're going to have a meeting, and then they're going to tell you that they should have collected something else. It is going to take a very long time to get that IEP, if you ever do, back to the way it was. You do not want to remove services during this pandemic without being absolutely 100% sure that the child truly has met the goal and no longer needs the services. In my mind, I find it very difficult to think of a circumstance when services can be removed during the pandemic. First of all, school districts don't have the data to demonstrate that the child has actually met the goal. And without the data to demonstrate that, why would we remove something? Any services that are on an IEP and not provided will have to be made up by the school district at a later date. This is really important, right? This is addressed in the March 21, 2020 supplemental fact sheet addressing the risk of COVID-19 in preschool, elementary, and secondary schools while serving children with disabilities. That is one heck of a long title. But if you Googled that, if you Google the Office for Special Education, this is what you Google. You Google OSER, O-S as in Sam, E-R, O-S-E-R, and you can put in risk of COVID-19 in preschool, and the document will pop up. And it's a document from the United States Department of Education, which says that, which talks about making up for services that were not provided during the pandemic, even though they were on the IEP. So according to the Florida Department of Education, and it's called the Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services, This is the department, the segment of the Florida Department of Education that deals with special education IEP issues. It's called the Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services, or Bs. That's what they call themselves, the Bs. Number one, services listed on the existing IEP must be provided as close as possible, allowing for current health and safety circumstances to what's written on the IEP. So the district has to try and provide the services as close as possible to what's on the current IEP, but taking into account health and safety. Number two, since each IEP is unique to each child, not every child in the state of Florida will need to have a revised IEP. So most, I think, children should have a revised IEP. However, it may not be necessary for your child. Maybe your child has speech and language therapy and that's all, and not a very complicated IEP, doesn't receive very many services, and it really doesn't have to be revised. According to the United States Department of Education, they always make they make very long sentences where with lots of words so you can't breathe, where due to the global pandemic and resulting closures of schools, there has been an inevitable delay providing services, or even making decisions about how to provide services. IEP teams must make an individualized determination whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed when schools resume normal operations. What the United States Department of Education is saying is, during the pandemic, because of the closures, because of everything that we had to go through and deal with that we've never gone through or dealt with before, that there is probably going to be situations in which the student did not receive the services that he or she was supposed to, and because the district genuinely couldn't provide them. And the Department of Education is saying in those situations, then the IEP team has to and should have a discussion about compensatory services, or making, another way to say that is making up for the services that were lost during the pandemic and having those services made up so that the child doesn't lose the support. And I have down here in simple terms, translation. Districts may need to provide additional remedial services to help students with IEPs who need to recoup lost skills. Give you some examples. We have a client whose child is in 6th grade. He's doing distance learning. And since the beginning of school, so it's like September, October, November, about 3 months. First 3 months of school, he has not received any help with, he's supposed to have help with reading every week. He's supposed to have help with math and writing. He hasn't received those services. And he's supposed to receive language therapy. He's received some of that, but not all of it. He's supposed to receive counseling from a psychologist. He's been receiving that like clockwork. That's working beautifully. But all the other services he hasn't been provided. So at the IEP meeting that we just had, we said to the district, we are seeking what we call remedial services, meaning we want the district to make up for all the time that they didn't provide the service in the first place. Look, we get it. Pandemic was crazy. We get it. You didn't know what to do or how to do it, or didn't have the people to do it. We get that. But you know what? We've been living with it for a while now. You still have an obligation, even though the pandemic happened, you still have an obligation to teach this child, and you still have an obligation to provide the services on the IEP. So we submitted a request to the district for, I don't remember, couple hundred hours total of help for math, help for reading, help for therapy. And we asked the district to make up and provide all those services. So that's what we did for that family. Another family, the student was not receiving the speech and language, I think it was language therapy, wasn't receiving language therapy, hasn't received language therapy since the beginning of the school year, also hasn't received reading support and math support. And here's the really neat thing about the reading support. In May, we had an IEP meeting for this family, and our advocate, one of my advocates, and they're all outstanding, may I say, she got the team to increase reading support from 45 minutes a day to 45 minutes 5 days a week. So like 235 minutes a week. They haven't been providing that at all this year. So we went in there, we calculated what the time was and made the request to the school, and they came up with a schedule of how they're going to provide all those services. It's going to take a while, but at least the child will be getting the help that they require. So just know that if you can request, it can be also referred to as compensatory services. You are requesting compensatory services or remedial services for any time that your services weren't provided during this school year, the current school year, or you can request any services that weren't provided in the spring. So school started back on March 30th in the state of Florida for most schools. And so from March 30th till the end of May or beginning of June, whenever your district had their last day of school, any services on the IEP that were not provided can be made up and should be made up. And you can request that of the school district to make up those services. And as a bonus, if your child should have had summer extended school year services during the summer, and either the school didn't address that or did it, but it wasn't really appropriate and tailored for your child, you may be able to request compensatory services for that little bit of time as well. It's really, the time of school after March 13th to the end of the school year, and again this school year. So that may be something that you want to look at and discuss with your IEP team. Know your rights. Your child's IEP is the governing document for your child's education. It is still the thing that the school district has to follow when they're educating your child. The district's options and timelines cannot override your child's IEP. And a lot of parents don't know this. At the beginning of the school year, when they were put under pressure to decide, what method were they going to choose, how long were they going to keep their child in school, what was it going to look like, no one was telling parents that if your child has an IEP, you have rights. If your child doesn't have an IEP in public school, you don't have any rights. So for example, if your child has an IEP, you can have a meeting with the school district. You can request certain people from the school district be present at that meeting. You can look at the goals. You can hold the school accountable. You can ask them, why did my child not meet this goal? What else do we have to do to help the child meet the goal? You can ask, did you provide the services? You can ask, could you provide me a schedule of when you worked with my child and what you worked with my child on? You can sue the school district. You can file a state complaint against the school district. All of these things you can do if your child has an IEP. If you're the parent of a child who doesn't have an IEP and they're, a gen ed student, you don't have any of those rights. You can't call the principal up and say, I want to have a meeting of all the important people involved in my child's education, and we're going to go over what the goals are and why he didn't achieve goals. What I call a typical parent of a typical student doesn't have those rights in the public school system. So you have a lot of rights. If general education students if gen ed students are given 3 to 4 options, your child must be given the same options, regardless of his or her disabilities. When the school districts opened up on March 30th in Florida, when they opened up on March 30th and they started to provide education to general education students, when that happened, they became obligated to provide services to children who have IEPs. They also became obligated that if they were offering distance learning to gen ed students, they had to offer distance learning to children with IEPs. They had to offer, if they were offering a combo of face-to-face and, for a couple of days a week, and online learning at home for a couple of days a week, they had to make that available to special education students as well. Now, by making available, you have to make sure that that kind of setting and that kind of program is appropriate for a child, because some children it wouldn't be appropriate for. Before making a decision about what you want to do with your child's education and about which educational option to choose, we strongly encourage you to, one, request an IEP meeting to discuss your questions and concerns. Everything's got to be discussed in an IEP meeting. Clarify and confirm what each option offers and how your child's IEP will be fully implemented. You have to have a conversation and things have to be written down. As you look at the different options school districts are offering, ask a lot of questions. So this is a list of questions that you can ask the school. How will my child's goals, services, and accommodations be implemented? Let's say your child's in face-to-face and you wanted to move him to distance learning, but you want to know how's his IEP going to be implemented? What does this look like? Who's the teacher that's going to be working on the goals? How often is ELA provided to the student? What time of day? What technology is being used? You want to ask, how often will my child receive live instruction from the classroom teacher? And you want to know who is the teacher, what time she's providing that instruction, and the length of it. You also want to know if your child has, let's say, support facilitation on their IEP, where a special education teacher works with them on reading, for example, 30 minutes, 5 times a week. Well, you want to know who is that ESC teacher? When is she going to provide that support facilitation? How many kids is she providing support facilitation to? Because it may not, most likely won't be one student. She could be providing support facilitation to a group, and you want to know how big the group is. What is the teacher to student ratio? We have classroom limits in the state of Florida. We have an average of 22 kids in a classroom, depending on the grade, but more or less. And, a lot of parents just expect that that's the number of kids who are going to be a classroom. Well, if you do Florida virtual school, which is a whole different system, but for sake of discussion here, an example, if you go to Florida virtual school, that teacher might have 100 kids. Okay, they might have a much larger classroom. She'll have a lot more kids to have to manage and have to deal with. So what you're thinking might be a more personalized service may not be. And please, I think Florida virtual school is a fabulous option. So please, I'm not cutting them down at all. I think they do just a wonderful job, and it is absolutely appropriate for the kids who need it. So some more questions to ask. How will my child be assessed? You want to know, how are they going to determine if the child's making progress? Are they going to be taking data every week? Are they going to be, like you do a spelling test, are you taking a spelling test every week? Because then I would know if my child's making progress or not on his spelling words. Is the teacher going to do an assessment? How frequently? How is progress going to be monitored? You can ask the teacher, can I see your data charts? Can I see how you collect data and what methodology you use? That I'd really like to know. You can absolutely ask that question. I was in a meeting one time and for a young man who had to have math and reading help. And it was the beginning of the school year. Well, no, kind of the middle of the school year. Beginning of school year. And we were in the meeting, and the special education teacher at the school, I was very familiar with. I had been in meetings with her before in other schools in the district, and she was wonderful. She was just outstanding. And all the kids that she worked with really made good progress. So I was all excited. I knew what kind of output she was capable of and what kind of results she was capable of. So we're in the meeting, and it comes her turn to talk about this student, and she's saying, oh, he's doing really good, and he's really sweet, and he likes to come and show off. And she's saying all these cute little things about him. And you got to learn to listen past the cute little things. But she's saying, everything. And I said, well, how's he doing in math? How's he doing in reading? What progress has he made? And she said, well, he's doing good. He's doing good progress. I think he's really going to benefit well. And that I am, that by the end of the school year, he's going to make a lot of progress. Well, number one, that tells me nothing. Number two, that didn't answer my question. And I asked her, I said, well, where's the data? Because I knew that this teacher knew how to collect data. And I said, where's your data that you've collected? And she just kind of looked at me like, oh no, the gig is up. And I said, you certainly know what data is. I said, where's the facts that show me that he's making progress, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, she got caught. And she said, oh, well, I don't have it here with me. She said, it's in my office. I said, okay. I said, was there an office in the school building? She says, yeah. I said, well, why don't you just go get it? Oh, the poor thing. She didn't expect me to say that. I said, just go get it. I said, when you bring it down here, and when you come back, we'll review it. So she left the meeting, and she was gone a very long time. And we were doing some other things in the meeting. Finally, she comes down, and she hands me and Mom one piece of notebook paper with probably maybe 12 words on it. And it clearly was written hastily while she was out of the room. She clearly didn't collect any data, and she knew it, and she got caught. So I said to her, I said, look, I've known you for a long time. You know better than this. And you know that this isn't data. And I said to the team, do me a favor. When you know I'm coming to a meeting, don't try and get one by me, because it won't work. So what we really like is, between now and our next IEP meeting, which is going to be in February, we really want to see some good data. We really want you to collect the information. We want to know his progress, how he's doing, how close he is to coming to accomplishing his goals, all of that. And they said, okay, we'll do that. Well, we went, and I asked them, I asked, do you know what I'm looking for, right? And they all said, yes, we know what you're looking for. So February came, and we had the follow-up meeting, and and I was curious to see what they were going to do. And I knew they'd have their act together. So the teacher gives Mom a binder, and with this beautiful cover on it, and every piece of paper was in one of those plastic cover sheets in the binder. Here's the funny thing. There are only like 5 sheets in the binder, but she put them into plastic coverings. She put them all in a binder with a lovely cover, and she reviewed her data sheets. She had her act together. It was really good. So it's really important to ask the question, what is your data going to look like? How are you going to collect it? And then it's really important to hold them accountable for providing it. All right. I guarantee you, every single time I go to that school and they know I'm coming, they have their ducks in a row. They absolutely know what the expectation is, because they know that's what they're supposed to do. Next thing is to ask is, if your child is struggling, what interventions will the teacher use? This is particularly important with an online distance learning system, which is completely new. If your child's struggling, how are they going to intervene? I don't know how they intervene. What is their plan? If your child doesn't want to pay attention, or doesn't want to focus, or doesn't want to do what you want them to do, what is that? What is the school going to do? How is the school going to deal with that? How will my child interact and build relationships with his peers? Something to ask. Really important to know how the teacher manages her classroom online. You have to be careful. Some teachers, unfortunately, I've had a couple cases this year of teachers indirectly bullying their kids. So if there was a student, we had one situation where the teacher really didn't like this child at all. And look, here's my philosophy. We weren't made to get along with everybody on this earth. You know, there's going to be people that we don't like, that don't like us, and that's just it. And teachers aren't supposed to love every single student that they have, and students don't love every single teacher that they have. So when it's not working, try and fix it, separate them, get to a different classroom, to a different teacher. So you want to know so this one teacher, I'm sorry, she clearly didn't like this student, so she never called on them when they were doing online learning, and she would open up, for discussion, and she'd have all the other kids answer questions. She never asked him. She never would take him off mute, so nobody could listen to him. This is what she did. Next, another question: how are face-to-face services such as speech, language, occupational, and physical therapies provided? You just need to ask. Some districts are providing teletherapy. A lot of districts can provide live therapy, and they're making really serious attempts to make sure that they are cleaning the rooms, that they are disinfected, that the staff is disinfected, that it's really super clean. So if you're bringing your child from home into the school for therapies, that it's as clean as it can possibly be. And, I was in a meeting one time, and the mother after the meeting said, I just don't know if they're gonna take this cleaning thing seriously. And I looked at her and I said, they're just as scared as you are. They don't want you coming in here with lots of germs and infecting them. They're equally as nervous as you are. And I don't think you have to worry. They're going to make sure that they disinfect, because they're at risk too. Their families are at risk too. So something to keep in mind. Your child is not required to stay in a setting if he or she is not demonstrating growth. I cannot stress this enough. Please do not feel that your child is relegated to staying at home if home learning is not working. If it is not working, then you have to have a discussion with your IEP team about getting your child back to face-to-face, okay? I understand completely there are some situations when a child cannot go back to school because of the fear of getting the virus and then bringing it home to, parents who are elderly or sick. I completely get that. And in those situations, then you have to really work with the school and hold them accountable for providing services for that child. So for example, I know of families, I know of advocates who are filing due process cases, legal action against school districts, to have a one-on-one that's in the IEP, to have those one-on-one services provided at home. The mother's not, as a parent, we are not supposed to be the teachers. The school is the teacher. The teacher's the teacher. We have one student who would not focus for his mom. So we created a system. He has a para, but the school wouldn't allow the para to come in home in this situation. But the para was able to, she had a really good rapport with this student. She was able to manage him via computer. So we actually had two computers for him. One was for the teacher, and while the teacher was teaching him, we also had another computer going with the assistant. And she was communicating with him, coaching him along, using the computer, talking to him in his ear, coaching him along while the teacher's teaching the class. So he was getting regular instruction, but at the same time, the para was saying, all right, okay, Jeremy, get out the reading assignment. Okay, that's right, that's the right assignment. She was able to see, we had a camera set up. I don't even remember how it was all set up, but she could see the work that he was doing and was able to coach him. It worked really well. If your child is not having success with online learning, you have the right to request an IEP meeting to discuss moving your child and changing your child's placement. We talked about that. The district is not allowed to change your child's school placement without your permission. They must get your permission. Now with COVID, because it was mass chaos, schools were told everybody, keep your kids at home, and that was just going to change of placement, but they had no choice. But now that school it's a new school year, and districts have had more time to deal with this, districts just cannot call you up one day and say, we're changing your child and now you've got to keep them at home. Because I've had parents where the schools called them and said, we can no longer teach your child at home, you have to bring him into school, or the reverse. Not allowed, not allowed. Recommendations: do not sign anything unless and until you clearly understand how your child will be educated. Make sure you ask your questions and you get answers. Once you sign the IEP and that document's in place, they're going to provide the services that are written on the IEP. Not that you talked about, not that they said would happen. They're going to provide what's written on the IEP. Do not agree to any IEP changes or amendments without an IEP meeting. It must be an official IEP meeting that follows both federal and state guidelines. A teacher conference is not an IEP meeting. A conversation you have with the principal during Carline is not an IEP meeting. An IEP meeting is scheduled, there's a time, there's a meeting notice that they send to you, there's an agenda, there's a point of discussion, meeting notes are taken, and the IEP is addressed, okay, in a formal way. You want to make sure that's the kind of IEP meeting you have, because you want everything properly documented. The school district has a legal obligation to provide the services on the IEP, even if the student is participating in the district's distance/online learning program from home. So what do you do when they don't do what they're supposed to be doing? So what do you do when they don't do what they're supposed to be doing? So let's say your child has an IEP, he's at home, they're not providing the services on the IEP. Your child might be in a face-to-face learning situation, brick and mortar, and he's supposed to have all these services and he's not receiving the services. What do you do? Okay, this is a big question. What do you do? Well, let's talk about that. It's critically important for you to keep data for the IEP 504 plan. I cannot stress this enough. Get a notebook. Get a notebook. And a spiral notebook, nothing fancy. Keep a journal. Write down what happens with your child when he's at home learning. So if Monday morning you sit down, the computer's on, and you have your son or daughter sit at the computer and they have a meltdown and they refuse to go online and participate in the class and run to their bedroom and slam the door, it won't come out, write that down. You need to write that down. Okay, if your child refuses to do homework, write that down. If your child has a really great day, gets a lot accomplished, it was really focused and had a fabulous day and really participated, but the only reason that happened was because you sat next to him the entire time, keeping him calm, encouraging him, redirecting him, write that down. All of that is really important. If, as happened in one case, a teacher just came online and announced that she was canceling the class. She said she was aggravated and what didn't feel like teaching, so she just shut the class off, shut the class down, and didn't show up for 2 more days. Document that. If your child's only getting ELA twice a week and he should have ELA 4 times a week, write it down. Get an empty box, something like a copy box. Those are great size boxes. They're sturdy. Get a box and save work samples. The easiest thing to do is get the box, put it in the corner of your kitchen or your family room or mud room. Do they even have mud rooms these days? I don't even know. That may be a northern thing. But throw it in the room, and where you can easily, when you're cleaning out your child's backpack, you throw the papers in the box, and then they're there. And when you need them, they're there. So you're not searching them for them or anything. Take pictures of your child's work. Take videos of your child struggling. So when your child's at home and they're doing work and it's sloppy and it's messy and it's not, they're not at all following the directions that the teacher is giving, take a picture of it. Take a picture, send it to the teacher and say, this is his work production. I don't know how to get anything better from him, or what do I do? If your child is struggling, take a video. All right. Be careful though, what you're taking a video of. And there's a couple caveats to that, couple cautionary notes to make. You have to keep in mind that the school district personnel, by virtue of what they do, are always looking out for children and looking out for children who are coming from difficult homes, abusive homes, children who aren't being fed, aren't being, their clothing's dirty, they're not being cared for. So by virtue of being in the public school system, this is what they're trained to notice. And so you have to be careful that when you put your child on camera, that you're not displaying it's a balance. You want to display show the behavior, but you also don't want to display a behavior where someone in the school is going to think that is going to report you to DCF because they think you're not managing your child's behavior properly. If you don't know this, you need to know this, that in the state of Florida, anyone who works with a child, a teacher, a doctor, anyone who professionally works with a child has a legal obligation that if they suspect the child's being abused in any, physically, emotionally, whatever, if they have a suspicion, they don't even have to prove it. They are obligated under the law to report that. They can report it anonymously, but they're obligated to report it. So that's important for you to know. So be careful what you share on your video. I will give you an example. I had a mom, we were on an IEP meeting. This was great. And the school was saying, this mom has 3 daughters with autism. Her youngest daughter is probably in 2nd grade. And the school is saying, okay, well, while she's doing distance learning, you want to sit her down at the computer and the teacher's going to go over this and this. And then for 30 more minutes, she's going to do math. And they were going through the schedule. And mom is just sitting there shaking her head. And I said to her, what is it? What is your concern? And she said, there's just no way this is going to happen. And the school is, being very upbeat and positive. And they're saying, oh, sure, just do this and this and this. And mom says, wait a minute. So she gets up, she takes her phone, she goes to her daughter, who is, very nice, clean, looks neat. You could tell she's really well cared for. She's sitting at the computer and she's banging on it, okay? And the mom, very sweetly, very nicely, very lovingly, and the patience of Job, says to her, okay, Isabel, you need to calm down. Isabel, here's your teacher. Let's look at your teacher. Because while mom's in the IEP meeting, Isabel's classroom is going on. So the mom is saying, okay, Isa, I want you to look at the teacher, pay attention. Here she is, look at the screen. There was no way on this earth that child was going to do anything that mother wanted her to do. That little girl wanted to do what that little girl wanted to do. And she was squirming and she was fist fussing and she was trying to get up and she was whiny and she's pushed her mom away. And it was really something to behold. Let me just tell you, that whole meeting took a turn because I said to the school, well, clearly none of us had a really good understanding of how this little girl learns or does not learn at home. And we need to completely restructure what we're talking about. So that's an example of how it was used really well. Here's another thing about taking video in your home. Make sure wherever your child's sitting up for home video, for online learning, that the area that your child is in is clean. You want it to be clean. You want books to be put away. You don't want papers. You don't want things strewn on the floor. You don't want busy looking shelves in the background with, empty plates or cans of soda, empty soda or worse. But you want it to look neat. People are going to judge you based on what they see. And if they get the feeling, and because I've heard comments made, okay, I've heard the comments. If they feel that, you're not keeping a good home, a clean home, if your house seems chaotic and you don't have control over it, these are mental notations that people make, and they make judgments about you. I'm not saying it's right, because it's not right, but it's what they do. So you don't want to give them material. Make sure that the learning area of your child is clean. Make sure that it's neat. Make sure that there's not garbage around. Make sure there's not clothes on the floor. Just make sure it looks like a nice area where your child can learn. Be careful what's in the background, all right? You don't want pictures of people. This is the internet, for heaven's sakes. I'm very old-fashioned, and I don't like anything of mine on the internet. Be careful what people see. Be careful what's on your shelves. People, again, will make judgments. So just take that into account when you're on camera. Make sure your child looks neat. I've heard comments from teachers when they didn't realize that I was still on the meeting virtually, that kids were still in their pajamas. And that was not cool. That was not good. Having the kid in the pajamas coming to school does not give the right message. So make sure your child is dressed nicely, that they're dressed for going to school, all right? You get the point. Something to take into consideration. So take videos of your child struggling. When is the teacher there? When is she not? Again, these are questions you should be asking. If therapy and or ESE service, such as help with reading or math, is not provided as written on the IEP, write it down. And you can just make a simple note, no therapy, no OT today, no PT, or PT for 20 minutes. We had one child who had speech language therapy 3 times a week for 30 minutes. The speech language therapist was providing therapy twice a week for 20 minutes. It's not the same. 20 minutes is not 30 minutes, and twice a week is not 3 times a week. So what do you do if there's a problem? And here's what you have to do. You have to document, right? Part of documentation means emailing the teacher, emailing the staffing specialist, emailing the therapist, and copy the principal. When you send emails to anybody who works in the school, you should automatically copy the principal, because then the principal is made aware of what's going on. Then you could say to the principal, I've been emailing you. This is a problem I've been having. This is a problem that's been going on for several weeks. And the principal says, well, I didn't know about it. You can say, well, what do you mean you didn't know about it? I've copied you on every single email. Okay? Completely changes the dynamic. So you want to send emails and copy the principal. If you want to, send a weekly summary. This is what worked well. This is what didn't work well. Jamie made progress. She didn't make progress. And keep all emails sent and received. Just hold on to them. Print them up, keep them in your phone, put them on your computer, whatever you do with them, but hold on to them. Look, and if you have to email the teacher or the principal every single day because there's a problem, then you email them every single day. And if they don't respond to you, then you call them on the phone. You do what you have to do to make things happen, to get a response, because time passes quickly, very, very quickly. And you want to make sure you get the help as soon as you can. So how do you get the situation fixed? So I'm just going to go over with you a summary of some of your options that you can use when things have escalated to a point that you need to take additional steps. One, you could always call the school and schedule an IEP meeting. That should always be your first step. The second thing is if you've called the school, you have an IEP meeting, but it's not working. Even though you had an IEP meeting, maybe the school's not doing what they're supposed to do. Maybe they're not telling you the truth. You can call the Florida Department of Education, and specifically the Bees department, and their phone number is on the screen. Call them up and say, this is my situation, and the school's not following the IEP, whatever it is. The Florida Department of Education, I've had many conversations with them. They're really open and willing to work with families to try and answer questions for families and try and settle situations. And I don't, on several occasions when parents have called up there, I know that the Florida, that the Department of Education has on occasion actually called the school district and said, yoo-hoo, what's going on down there in your district? We have a mom from ABC school. This is the concern that she's having. Nothing seems to be going right. Can you check into it? So I do know that they've done that from time to time. You can also ask them for advice and recommendations. They'll also tell you if it's really a problem, because there are some things that go on in schools that aren't, that even if your child has an IEP, you can't fight it. I had the other day, one of our clients called us. Her daughter's in middle school, 8th grade, and the history teacher is changing grades. He's falsifying records, and he's also not very nice and not very respectful, and is not easy to deal with. And mom called all upset, and I get it, but I can't file a complaint because the teacher's not nice. I can't file a complaint because I can't file a formal complaint under IDEA, because the grades are being changed. That's not a violation of IDEA. So sometimes if you call the Florida Department of Education, they might be able to help. You can file a state complaint, which we'll go over in a minute. And to find the formal form to file a state complaint, just Google FLDOE, formal ESE state complaint form. That's what I do. And it pops up, and you can populate all the fields and follow the instructions. There is a way to file a complaint. If it's not written quite right, they can dismiss it. You can request mediation, and you can file due process. So let's go over those in a little bit in detail. Filing a formal state complaint. You as a parent can do this on your own. You want to be careful that the Florida Department of Education will only review a complaint that has violations of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So if you have a 504 plan and you have a complaint about a 504 plan, they won't help you. This process will not help you. You have to file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. So, but you can file a formal complaint, fill out the form. When you file a complaint, the state assigns an investigator to your case, and they're responsible for getting information from you, from the district. They look at the details of the case, and their job is to determine if the district violated IDEA in any way, shape, or form in working with your child and developing the IEP. If the school district has made a violation, then the district can work, have the school do trainings for their staff on how to avoid this problem again. But the state has limited authority. The state cannot tell the district how to fix a situation. They can't say to the district, you have to give this child a one-on-one assistant. Okay, they can't do that. They work with compliance issues. You can request mediation. When you request mediation, the state sends down an official mediator, a trained mediator. The mediator is provided at no cost to you as the parent, and you and the school district representatives from the school district will meet, maybe at the main office of the school district, and you'll be in a meeting room, and the mediator is there and says, hello, how are you? And everybody introduces themselves. and there's an opening statement made from you as to what you think the problem is, and then the school makes a statement about what they think the problem is, and then the school personnel will leave, and you're there with the mediator explaining your situation and your reasoning and why you're there for mediation and what you want from the school district. Then the mediator leaves the meeting, leaves you, and will go to where the school members are and talks to them, explains to them what you said, what you want, what your concerns are, listens to the school members of the team, then comes back and talks to you, and goes back and forth until an agreement hopefully can be reached. If an agreement isn't reached, that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the goal is to reach an agreement. And here's the only thing I want to tell you about mediation. Mediation only works if both parties show up willing to negotiate. If you show up at mediation and the school district does not show any intent on working with you, on coming up with a solution, if they're not genuine, walk out. Okay? Just walk out, because you don't want to have to go, you don't want to sit and go through a mediation and with a team that's not genuine and trying to solve the problem. All right. I don't recommend it for everybody. There are situations when it could be helpful, but again, only if the district is genuinely willing to come to the table. Or you can file due process. Filing due process is legal action against the school district. As a parent, you have the right to do this if you believe the district has violated your child's rights for having an IEP, if they violated IDEA, if they haven't complied with an IEP. There's a slew of reasons why you might file due process. The advantage of due process is in the state of Florida, districts take them very seriously. They really take notice because it's legal action against the district. And they, if they don't pay attention, they might go to court, and that's a lot of money to go to court for both sides, parents and school districts. But when you file a due process case, one of the benefits is that the school district must meet with you within 15 days of filing the due process. So, or 16 or 17, depending on what you agree on with the school. But what's important about that is that the school district doesn't control the calendar. So they can't say to you, well, we're really busy for the next 3 weeks, and we only do IEP meetings on even number days of odd number months when the moon is full in the western sky or some other crazy thing, okay? They can't do that. They have to have a resolution meeting with you and talk about, your complaint and how to settle it. Any commitments they make in that process, they have to honor. There's a judge overseeing the whole case. So you don't necessarily meet with the judge in the beginning stages. You may never see the judge, but there's a judge overseeing the case to make sure that both parties are doing particularly the school district is doing what they're supposed to do. I have had a lot of clients that we filed due process for quite successfully. Not every single one, but most of them. They are very effective. They can be very effective. So, and that is, it's not for everybody, and but it is for those who are in a situation where they need to take what we call the nuclear option. Okay. So now you have all this information and you're all prepared for the IEP meeting. This presentation, are there any questions or anything that I can answer at this time? Jason, are you there? If you're not there, I'm just going to have to talk about something and fill up time until you come back. So he's not there. Well, what can we talk about?
Can you? Oh, sorry. My computer muted. I was talking.
That's okay. That's all right. I was prepared to go it alone. I could find
uh,
something
but
to talk about.
but it doesn't look like we have any questions. So I just wanted to thank you so much for the treasure trove information that you provided us with, and between this presentation and our last presentation, there's just so much to go through, and
Yeah.
I would tell everybody on this webinar live or who's watching the recording, if you have any questions, please give Pam a call. She seems to be the expert in the state of Florida. And I'm sure if you were out of the state that she could probably point you in the right direction in another state as well. At least to let you know who you might want to talk to or who you can look for. And that's it. If you have any questions, send them into the chat, or if you miss it after the fact, you can always email them to me or to Pam. And I'm sure one of us can get you the answer. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and have a great Thanksgiving next week and Christmas. I don't think we have any more webinars scheduled until January. Good night, everybody, and have a great day.
Good night. Thank you.